Okay, so what I'm going to do is go through the Boilerplate project from kind of beginning to end of up to creating some pages in AppSmith so that you can do your project. So I'm going to start from cloning the repository from scratch again. Um, and uh, Sorry if the audio is not optimal. Um, I don't have an external microphone right now on my home computer. So in any event, if this UI looks weird, it's because it's actually running in Linux, but all the stuff I'm going to do is going to be the same whether you're on a PC or on a Mac. So first thing is go to the repo and the boilerplate repo and copy the URL. And then what I'm going to want to do is clone that repo. So I'm going to move into my folder for 3200, and then I'm going to clone the repo. Now, of course, you can do this through VS Code if you'd like. Um, that's totally fine. I'm just doing it from the command line. So now that I have it cloned, I'm going to go into that folder that it created, so the Flask MySQL boilerplate. And then I'm going to go ahead and open VS Code. Now you'll open it from however you do it on your computer. Just make sure you navigate to the Flask MySQL boilerplate, of course. So I'm going to do something like, for me, I do it from the command line. Let's make it a little bit bigger so you can see everything. Okay, so first thing we need to do is add our secrets. Now you may be wondering, like, why make these password files? And let me explain. Um, you never want to send repository secrets, so passwords, um, private keys, uh, any sort of authentication tokens or whatnot. You never want to post that on sort of a GitHub repository. And so if you know about Git a little bit, you'll know that this particular file, the git ignore, means anything in this file doesn't get basically synced with GitHub. It doesn't get committed to the repository. And in here, you'll see I have the two password files that I've asked you to create listed as git ignore. So that means whatever you put in your secrets folder is not going to get, well, those two files. I mean, if you put other stuff, it'll get synced. But if you put those two files, they're not going to get synced. And so, some of you are moving into more professional software dev shops. Different strategies like this are used to be able to build secure software, to be able to access, secure APIs and whatnot, but not push all of the credentials up to GitHub. So in any event, that was just a little background. So I'm going to go ahead and create, first of all, the db password.txt. And in this file, I'm just going to put abc123. Now, don't hit enter or anything after it. Just put it and then save it. And then I can close that file. And then I'm going to next create db_root password.txt. And I'm going to put a different password or the same password. What I don't want you to do is to hit enter after. So hit save. Okay. So now we have our password files created. This is what will allow MySQL to bootstrap the database. Okay. So before I load the Docker containers, build the images and load the containers, I just want to again point out some of the stuff that's going on in the Docker compose.yaml file. So remember that we have three services, and I'm just going to compress them here so you can kind of see what's going on. So the things under services are web, DB, and AppSmith. So we're going to have three containers, kind of like virtual machines, but they're containers in Docker. Importantly, let me talk a little bit about the DB container. So whenever we start the Docker containers, like whenever we initially launch them, they are going to basically preload a set of SQL files that you provide. In this boilerplate repository, I've supplied both the Northwind database and another sample database called Classic Models. And if you look in the DB folder, you'll see that there's a set of files that end in .sql. Keep that in mind. So I want to take a look at this line right here in the docker compose.yaml. So you'll notice that ./db is referring to that folder right there. Anytime you see dot, it just means relative to wherever this particular file is. Okay, so I want you to imagine that, roughly speaking, the DB folder is kind of like on a USB drive. Okay, and this line takes that USB drive conceptually and like plugs it into the container, the DB container, the MySQL container. And inside the container, it shows up like at this place. So, sometimes when you plug in a USB drive on your computer, it'll pop up in the file browser or whatnot at a particular location. And so this is where it shows up inside the container. The reason that's important is because the MySQL image, the Docker MySQL image, has like a default behavior that says any SQL files that are inside that folder, inside the container, automatically get executed in alphabetic order. So you'll notice there's a set of SQL files, meaning they end in .sql, and they will get executed in alphabetic order. Okay. Now, this little part right here means that the files are read-only. Don't have to worry about that. But any file I put in the DB folder will get executed automatically. So just to prove that point, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm just going to call it testdb.sql. Okay. All right. So in testdb.sql, I'm going to create database testdb. I'll use testdb, and then I'll create table student with an ID int name varchar 40, just so you can kind of see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to save that file. All right, so now I have everything there. So because I haven't created the containers yet, and I add that new file, it's going to be there when the Docker container gets created, and thus it'll get executed. Once you've already created the containers, if you add a file to the DB folder, it doesn't matter. It's not going to execute it. The only way you would get it to execute is to basically scrap the current Docker container, the current MySQL container, and restart it up. Okay. For any event, there we go. So that's going to get our databases automatically created. When you're working on the project, you will put your database bootstrap file inside this folder. If you name it .sql, it will automatically get executed. Okay, so last thing I'll point out for now, these lines are where we're making use of the secrets folder, the secrets files. These environment variables, MySQL, the container, knows to look for them and what to do with them once they're there. And so there is an environment variable basically telling the container, hey, if this environment variable is there, this is what you should set the password, the root password. And you're like, but wait, this is in a secrets folder. This says run. Well, if you look down at the bottom and kind of think through it, it's getting mapped to secrets. So the link between this stuff up here comes from this stuff. You don't need to understand this. I'm not going to ask you anything about the secrets except that the files exist. Okay, so we have our SQL container ready to go. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure all of this is saved, and then I'm going to go back to my terminal. Oops. Okay, and I'm going to build the container. So Docker compose build. This step will happen if you just do Docker compose up. It will automatically build the containers. I just built them a little bit earlier, so they are kind of already there. Now I'm going to spin the containers up. And I should say, this doesn't build the containers, I'm sorry. This builds the images. Okay, so now let's start the container. So docker compose up. And this is going to take a bit. And you can see that AppSmith, DB, and web are all running and kind of like starting up together. So these are logging messages from AppSmith, these are logging messages from the DB container, and these are logging messages from the Python web container. And I'm sure I need to scroll a bunch. Okay. So while AppSmith is continuing to start, I'm fairly certain that the MySQL container is started. So what I'm going to do is just double check that through DataGrip. So I'm going to go to DataGrip, and now I want to create a new data source. I'll go down to MySQL, and I'm going to call this the project DB. It's running on localhost, and the port I want to connect to is the public port for the DB container. Okay, so if I go back to my docker compose.yaml file, the public port is the first number here, not the second number, the first number. Okay, so I'm going to connect to 3200. I'm going to do the root user, and I use the password abc123. Terrible password. Since it's the first time I'm running DataGrip on this computer, I need to download the drivers. So let me go back to DataGrip. Okay, let's test the connection. And we get succeeded. So that means we were able to connect to the MySQL database. So I'm going to click OK. And here I am in the console for MySQL. Okay. As you're developing your database, you're probably going to want to put things in a SQL file. So I'm going to come over here to my files folder, the file dialog, or no, the panel. I think it's called panel. And I'm going to choose a new SQL file. And I want to call it checking db.sql. Okay. And it should be placed in the DataGrip projects folder. So if you're not sure, you could always come down to, let's see, where is it? Open in, see, on my Mac, there's an additional option, and you can basically like show it in Finder. But in any event, it says dialect is not configured. So right now, DataGrip doesn't know, do I intend to write code in this file for MySQL or for SQLite or for some other data product? So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say this is going to be MySQL dialect, and I want to connect it to my project DB database. Okay. All right. So now I have my SQL file. When we connect it to the database, you'll see that, let me get rid of this. Let me expand this. So let's say show databases. That's kind of small. Hold on, let me change the font size. I'm going to let's change this to 18, 20, 22, 22. Okay, show databases. So it shows me the databases. And you'll notice that there's Northwind, there's classic models, and there's testdb, which is the extra new file I created. Now, when you do yours, you're not going to have testdb unless you add that new little SQL file that I created. So here I'm going to say use Northwind, and so when we say use Northwind, we get this message that says current schema is not introspected. So in order for DataGrip to do auto completion, so drop downs and know whether or not you're typing a table name that is correct, it does this process called introspecting the schema. And what that means is it goes to MySQL and it basically says to MySQL, tell me about all the tables in this database, all of the constraints, all the stuff. And it then uses that to kind of build a structure of the particular database you're using. And so the way we get that to happen is we say, whenever we say use Northwind, if it's the first time we've done it, we'll have this little message up here that says introspect schema. So I'm going to select it. And there we go. Sorry, my computer's a little laggy, I think because of all of this recording stuff. Also, DataGrip is hogging resources. Okay, so we now are in Northwind, so I can say show tables, and it'll show me all the tables in Northwind. Okay. If I wanted to double check that testdb, I could say use testdb. Now notice it's a new database. I haven't introspected it, so I need to click introspect schema again. And now show tables will show me what's in DB. So now I know that students there. I could say describe, or I could say DESC or describe, same difference, student, and it'll tell me the attributes and whatnot. Okay, I'm not going to need testdb anymore. I'm going to go back to Northwind, but I'll need to reuse it. All right. So I'm going to stop this video here and then pick up with Python in the next video.